the evidence I have discovered about my theory for the Roman Dodecahedron.
A sacred relic buried for centuries, a geometry no Roman text dared mention, and now a discovery that may rewrite everything. What if the most mysterious artifact of the Roman Empire wasn't Roman at all? Why are these 12-faced bronze shapes showing up only on the empire's outer edges? And why are scientists now saying the truth about them is far more disturbing than any past theory? This isn't just a mystery solved, it's a forbidden story uncovered, grounded in leaked reports, scientific residue analysis, and a forgotten manuscript. This is the untold truth of the Roman Dodecahedron, the field that changed everything. It began not with fanfare, but with a whisper of metal under the soil. The summer of 2023 was unusually warm in rural Lincolnshire, England, a stretch of countryside not known for breaking news. But just outside the quiet village of Norton Disney, in a farmer's field long plowed and forgotten, a group of amateur archaeologists made what some have already called the most important Roman-era discovery in decades. Or at least, that's the rumor. According to whispers that spread quickly through online forums and even found their way into podcasts, the object they pulled from the earth wasn't just old, it was flawless. A Roman dodecahedron, perfectly preserved, unusually intact, and buried in a way that suggested someone, long ago, had wanted it to remain hidden. This group, attached to a local heritage society, had spent innumerable weekends scouring the area out of earshot of professional ambition. They used the metal detector, faint but steady signal, not at all unusual in this district, where every now and then a Roman coin or a sherd of pottery surfaces. This time, however, the ground gave way to something different, something strange. Beneath inches of soil and clay lay a 12-sided bronze object, roughly the size of a baseball. Smooth and symmetrical, it glinted faintly in sunlight, apparently untouched by the decay of centuries. Each of its 12 faces is a perfect pentagon, punctuated by precisely carved holes of varying diameters. At each vertex was a little, ornate knob, like a miniature crown. The whole piece was cool to the touch, and surprisingly heavy. Reportedly, one of the diggers broke the silence after finding this by simply whispering, "It's real." In stark contrast to numerous casual discoveries and conventional finds of dodecahedra without any context, this one came out of a clearly defined archaeological layer and was excavated amongst shattered pieces of late Roman pottery, rusted nails, decorative brooches, and a small cache of bronze coins, of which some coins dated to the late 3rd century. Perhaps of the most significance was what came to appear like a foundation from a collapsed Roman structure nearby, perhaps a villa or an outpost, thus offering a rare contextual glimpse into the object's resting place. Immediately, the theories about the purpose of this finding began to circulate. Some said it was a ritual burial. Others said it was purposely hidden by an ancient person fleeing persecution and attempting to conceal the sanctity or illegality of the object. One persistent rumor even stated the object was buried below the villa wall itself, under the very sites of its owners, only to be sealed away forever before the structure fell. Whether by accident or otherwise, placement seemed deliberate, almost ceremonial. The condition of the artifact was almost too good to be true, near mint. After more than 17 centuries of persecution underground, it showed virtually no corrosion or erosion, no rust, no pitting to speak of whatsoever. Even the normally clean yet rough surface of the delicate inner chamber of the majority of other examples was too wonderfully preserved. Some call this a protective coating, while others go further and claim it was even embalmed. Scientists haven't established this, but enthusiasts pointed out quickly that such good preservation can't just be a coincidence. News of the find beyond academia unraveled online threads filled with speculation. Posts went viral, comparing it to alien tech, and the situation was only incited further when reportedly Joe Rogan brought the subject up during his podcast, expressing extreme wonder, drawing attention to the fact that some 100 or so of these have been found. and no one knows what they're for. Whether that was a casual remark or something more intentional, Rogan had surely opened the audience's eyes to an age-old mystery. Suddenly, the silent fields outside of Norton Disney were in the midst of an international conversation. But this wasn't just a forgotten tool. It looked like something someone had wanted buried and forgotten. The puzzle, Rome. Never named, the Roman Empire recorded almost everything. Taxes, battles, building materials, even the shape and dimensions of mundane farming tools were inscribed, sketched, and documented in scrolls and stone. Yet, among this avalanche of records, one object remains conspicuously absent: the Roman Dodecahedron. Not a single inscription mentions them. No ancient manual explains their function. No mosaic or temple wall depicts them in use. It's as if these artifacts were part of a secret Rome was unwilling or afraid to preserve. The omission itself is striking. More than 130 of these 12-sided bronze shapes have been uncovered across Roman-era Europe, but curiously, not one has ever been found in Rome proper. None have emerged from the heartland of the empire, central Italy, the seat of emperors, senators, and scholars. Instead, they appear only on the fringes, in the wind-swept hills of Britain, the forested valleys of Germany, and the stormy coastlines of ancient Gaul. Their distribution is like a constellation, shining only at the empire's edge, never its core. Stories have circulated for decades that this topographical scheme was no accident. Some have proposed that the dodecahedra were the work of secret societies or various competing spiritual sects operating in contravention of Roman religious norms. Others surmise they were too dangerous to be displayed within the confines of Rome, perhaps artifacts of forbidden knowledge, kept at the periphery for reasons of safety or even secrecy. These are, of course, uncorroborated allegations, but the fact that they are kept alive does indicate something. The absence of evidence is in itself suspicious. And then there is the level of skill. These are not mere objects made within a few hours. Each Roman dodecahedron is a triumph of precision metalwork. 12 absolutely flat and mathematically precise pentagonal faces are pierced with circular holes of slightly differing sizes. These subtle differences indicate systematization for some sort of real function and not mere ornamentation. The holes themselves are not randomly placed. Some show diameters in a particular sequence, whether smallest to largest, or some sort of other linking ratio made familiar from nature. At each vertex, tiny spherical knobs protrude like punctuation marks, often hand-formed or soldered individually. No two are exactly the same, as if each were made for a specific location. One theory, which has attracted a considerable amount of attention on the cyber world in the past few years, is that the dodecahedra served as measuring instruments, quite possibly measuring distances or calibrating projectiles. This theory, however, breaks down easily upon scrutiny. First, it appears that none of the Roman military manuals mentions the device. Secondly, for materials, most of the bronze, but not very significant to waste on something so disposable as a rangefinder. Above all, if really standardized military instruments, why did they appear only in some provinces and never in any of the empire's administrative hubs? Another tantalizing speculation connects the objects with astronomy. Some theorists contend that the variable hole sizes and angular geometry imply celestial tracking. It is as if the dodecahedron were a kind of star map or solar calendar. When put into the correct position, sunlight passes through certain holes and casts shifting patterns of light and shadow. It is a beautiful theory, both poetic and plausible. But the Romans bequeathed no drawing, no training document, no record of such use. Not even the famously meticulous Pliny the Elder, who wrote works running hundreds of volumes cataloging almost all the Roman technology and natural science, ever mentioned the device. This one rumor, perhaps the most disturbing of them all, ties silence to suppression. An increasing number of fringe historians and amateur researchers believe that the dodecahedra were not Roman at all. Instead, some speculate that these articles may have come from older, indigenous cultures. Celtic, Gallic, or even pre-Roman peoples, whose very knowledge was then absorbed into or erased by Roman conquest. If that were the case, then it could explain their finds so far away from Rome and the total lack of mention in the official records. The dodecahedron, in that view, becomes an emblem of resistance, an artifact from a suppressed spiritual tradition that the empire could not allow yet would not openly disavow. What is undeniable is this. Across the ruins of ancient Europe, these hollow bronze shapes have been found again and again, fastidiously crafted and buried with intention, without any written rationale, imperial endorsement, or apparent alignment to any known Roman doctrine. They do not fit the mold of Roman pragmatism, nor do they look like abode or temple artifacts that are typically found in Roman context. They are a true anomaly. And yet, despite this masterful design, every single one is hollow and silent inside. Until now, rituals in the wrong places. If these objects were tools or ornaments, why were they buried like sacred offerings? Why were they discovered not in workshops or homes, but in places dripping with ritual and symbolism? The more archaeologists cataloged Roman dodecahedron finds, the stranger the pattern became. These 12-faced enigmas were turning up in the most unexpected and often spiritually charged locations, places where their presence didn't align with Roman practicality, but whispered of something deeper, something Rome may have tried to forget. The rumors go back decades. In Belgium, a dodecahedron was pulled from the bed of a river, not lost in transit, but seemingly placed there. In ancient burial grounds across Gaul and Britain, several were unearthed, nestled beside the bones of the dead. Some lay near cremation urns or funerary vessels, as if intended to guide or protect a spirit on its journey to the afterlife. The arrangement wasn't casual. In more than one case, the dodecahedron had been placed at the head or heart of the deceased, a position of deep symbolic meaning in both Roman and Celtic traditions. One of the theories that came out from this study is that the objects possessed some kind of ceremonial power. Perhaps they were used for rites of passage, or for purifying and protecting, or even summoning. There are no written records of their use, but the clues seem louder than words. For example, one find placed the dodecahedron next to a series of altars and offering bowls under the floor of a Roman bathhouse. Another was found under the foundations of a theater, a place where myth, drama, and ritual performance often converged. Not entertainment venues alone, they were centers of cultural expression, and sometimes covert spiritual ceremony. If these had been declaimed, they would have been broken and scattered. But here they were, whole and deliberately buried. Some archaeologists suspect that dodecahedra might have played a role in divination, trying to reach into the future or communicate with unseen forces. Many feel that the internal hollowness and strangely arranged holes in the dodecahedra were used to cast shadows, direct smoke, or enhance sound during some ritualistic settings. Today, replicas are producing rather odd effects in acoustic terms as the wind or the breath passes through, creating a kind of low hum or an eerie whistle. Some researchers have quietly pointed out that such effects might really be a mimic of the kind of atmospheric impressions that ancient people associated with spirits or gods. Some hold that, more controversially still, the objects had protective powers. Some of these were found next to ancient military outposts, obviously not battlefields, but in supply rooms or buried under barracks. One instance speaks about a dodecahedron found together with a statuette of a household Roman god and a bundle of spears. This left room for a theory, somehow speculative but alive, which prescribes protective talismanic properties to the objects while mixing goods with some form of spiritual insurance. Some have even conjectured that they might have been used in pre-battle rituals invoking the favors of some deities not known to the official pantheon of Rome. The most perplexing class of find, namely dodecahedra, found together with hordes of Roman coins, presents itself. Were these random piles of out-of-use money? No, these were intentional caches, hidden and guarded portions of wealth buried from sight. Uncomfortable possibilities arise from having a dodecahedron in the hoard. Was it merely something else of value? Or was it placed there to sanctify the treasure against thieves, or perhaps link the hoard to some sacred vow? In some folk tales, such objects weren't just charms. They were regarded as contracts binding the owner and object in a spiritual exchange. Walking away from such a contract might earn you ill luck or even death. Yet, the geography may very well be the most peculiar pointer of all. These objects seem to remain isolated to western provinces of Rome, Gaul, Britannia, and parts of Germania that were bastions of fierce resistance to Roman rule. They have no trace whatsoever in the eastern provinces of Egypt, Judea, and even Greece. Some suggest this regional pattern indicates a certain localized spiritual practice that Rome had never come to harness. Others suggest this regional practice may have constituted some kind of magical underground, a spiritual network that crossed over the provinces but was barely perceptible to Roman authorities. So why do these objects only appear where Rome's influence met resistance, and not where Rome thrived? A quiet rebellion in bronze. The Roman Empire conquered with swords, roads, and laws, but also with silence. In many corners of the provinces, Rome didn't just suppress rebellion, it buried it. Culture, religion, memory, all overwritten by imperial rule. But some traditions refused to vanish. In the forests of Celtic Britain and the valleys of ancient Gaul, something endured. And according to growing speculation, the Roman dodecahedra may be the physical remnants of a spiritual defiance, a quiet rebellion cast in bronze. Long before Caesar crossed into Gaul, the region had its own rhythm. The people of the western provinces followed seasonal calendars marked by solstices and harvests. Their priests, the Druids, led complex rituals beneath sacred trees, speaking to sky gods and forest spirits. Fire, smoke, and shadow were their tools. Circles, spirals, and pentagons formed the geometry of their beliefs, symbols of life, death, and rebirth. But to Rome, these were not just quaint local customs. They were dangerous. Rome feared anything it couldn't control. As early as the 1st century AD, Roman law began to oppose what was termed superstitio, an unauthorized religious practice. The Lex Cornelia de Sicarius et Veneficius was one law aimed at sorcery, divination, and ritual viewed as a threat to the state order. The vagueness of the wording gave wide-ranging powers to Roman officials to accuse, arrest, and silence. In Gaul and in Britannia, Druids became declared enemies of the state. Gatherings were prohibited in the name of sedition, and rituals were outlawed. And yet, dodecahedra continued to appear, buried under villas, hidden in graves, sealed in walls. Some historians might propose these artifacts were instead pre-Roman, subsumed within local practice, and kept entirely out of the eyes of the empire. The case of the Norton Disney find appears to boost this idea. This was not a casual offering, a deliberate archaeological layer above a Roman one, far from Roman official culture, was created for its deposition. The emphasis on its preservation speaks of respect, even secrecy. It is an accepted speculation of certain alternative researchers that the objects belonged to an underground belief system that adjusted itself under the Roman regime. They were not to be displayed in public view, but were they quietly passed down? A spiritual resistance movement written in geometry. The dodecahedron was not merely symbolic for the 12 faces and the hollow center. It might also have been used in ritual practice, invoked during seasonally recurring ceremonies, or used as an instrument for contacting the spirit realm. One highly speculative theory even associates it with ancient moon cultic activity, where the 12 faces represent lunar cycles and the shifting holes to filter the light of the moon during specific phases. The pushback was not loud. There were no revolts fought with these artifacts. No manifestos were inscribed in bronze, but the resistance was no less real. In a world of imposed belief dictated by Rome, passing a sacred object encoded with cosmic knowledge in secrecy was an act of cultural survival, an act of defiance, silent as it was. Some scholars have pointed to how these objects never show signs of wear typical of common tools. They weren't passed hand to hand in labor, but instead handled with reverence. That, too, fits the pattern. These were sacred items, ritual objects, not for work, but for worship. If true, then every dodecahedron unearthed isn't just an archaeological artifact. It's a surviving ember of a fire Rome tried to extinguish. And perhaps the most telling clue is that which is not found as evidence. Nowhere in Roman texts are these condemned. Nowhere are they described, banned, or even mentioned. It is as if Rome did not just ignore them. It deliberately erased them. A cultural amnesia imposed from the top down, as one historian refers to it as archaeological censorship, where objects associated with banned traditions were never outlawed, but instead went undocumented, unspoken, and buried in bureaucratic silence. What if these relics weren't lost by accident, but hidden to escape erasure? The geometry of light and shadow. In 2024, the mystery took a sharp turn, from ancient whispers to scientific revelation. A team of researchers at the University of Ghent launched a project that would push the Roman dodecahedron from folklore to the front lines of interdisciplinary science. Their goal was deceptively simple: to understand the object's geometry, not as art or ornament, but as a language. What they discovered has sparked theories that blur the line between astronomy, ritual, and ancient technology. According to circulating reports, the dodecahedra may not have been random creations at all, but highly sophisticated instruments designed to track celestial movement using nothing more than sunlight, bronze, and shadow. Rumors swirled quickly after the team's internal notes were leaked to a niche academic forum. The initial tests, some say, involved modeling the Norton Disney dodecahedron using high-resolution 3D scans. What they found was extraordinary. The holes on each face, previously thought to be decorative, were not uniform, but carefully graduated in size. When mapped, the ratios between the diameters matched known astronomical intervals tied to solstices, equinoxes, and even lunar transitions. The object wasn't just beautiful, it was functional. Apparently, more experiments involved directing light through the holes under control conditions. Under some angles, sunlight passed through one hole and projected a ray that landed exactly on the inner edge of another. Since these alignments changed with the position of the sun, a graceful, slow dance of shadow and light was performed across the inner chamber and the surrounding surfaces. The patterns were not random, however. They followed the very cycles that ancient Celtic and Gallic communities celebrated with festivals, feasts, and rites. One investigator, speaking anonymously, described Crater as a three-dimensional sundial fused with a spiritual compass. The dodecahedron not only told time, it marked sacred time. Moments when the veil between worlds is said to thin. Times when spirits could be stirred. Times when nature was at her fullest intoxicating power. The light passing through the holes may have activated not just patterns, but invoked ceremonies, aligned energies, or even collaborated with divine focus. This correlates with the assumptions long held by alternative historians who have actually theorized that dodecahedra must have served as cosmic instruments as were. So it is that Romans probably would have adopted or adapted them for their use, not fully grasping or understanding the very intent behind dodecahedron use. One fringe belief even states that it encodes a kind of lost natural technology, not based on mechanical power, but on harmony with light, sound, and geometry. This is far above what mainstream scholars would accept, but with every new test, it becomes decidedly difficult to throw these artifacts as mere examples of another age. And it was not only light. Ghent's team studied the acoustic properties as well. In fact, whenever you would utter something in a given frequency near the dodecahedron, creaky patterns inside the chamber would emerge on some harmonics, which are reminiscent of natural vibrations recorded in holy woods of northern Europe. Thus, there are wildfires now that objects were intended not only to be affected by sunlight, but also by sound. Ritual chants, wind instruments, or even whispered prayers might have triggered specific acoustic responses inside the object, transforming it into something like a ritual amplifier. To a few, this might sound like fantasy, but when we set this idea beside actual ancient artifacts, such as the Greek Antikythera mechanism, which is an analog computer dating way back in the past, doesn't such technology seem quite so impossible? Rather, it fits into the jigsaw of past knowledge concerning how pre-modern societies interacted with their worlds, not so much as observers stuck in a matrix, but as participants dwelling within a vital cosmos. Geometry wasn't the only secret these objects held. Their hollow cores told a darker story. Blood, resin, and sacred fire. While geometry revealed one layer of the dodecahedron's mystery, it was fire, and what lingered in its wake that unearthed something far darker. Speculation had long surrounded the possibility that these objects were used in ritual. But in 2024, a new wave of research shifted the conversation from theory to something far more visceral. Not only could the dodecahedra channel light and echo sound, but according to circulating lab reports and leaked lab memos, they may have also been vessels, sacred chambers used in rites of fire, sacrifice, and communication with the dead. The breakthrough allegedly began not in the field, but in a lab at Oxford's prestigious Radiochemical Institute. Researchers there had gained access to several dodecahedra stored in European museums, including the nearly pristine artifact from Norton Disney. Using advanced spectrometry, they examined the hollow interiors at a molecular level, hoping to detect trace residues that time might have forgotten. What they reportedly found shocked the team. Within the inner chamber of multiple dodecahedra were faint but undeniable traces of burned organic material, animal blood, charred bone particles, and in some cases, compounds chemically identical to lavender and thyme ash. Lavender and thyme 2 plants, whose histories in ritual and preservation go far beyond fragrance to include warding off spirits, honoring the dead, and purifying space were no mere accidents. From some corner of the closed circle of academics came hushed whispers speculating about intentional selection of these herbs to accompany sacrifices in a manner whereby the plants were burned along with blood to summon something or someone. There have been remnants left behind. Another artifact, allegedly subjected to scrutiny under what is termed as clean lab conditions, bore up to the tests of those searching for resin compounds associated with ancient embalming practices. These were the very formulas used in Roman and pre-Roman funerary rites for the preservation of dead bodies or for the preparation of offerings. The presence of these compounds suggested that these dodecahedra were not just used within sacred spaces, but were active participants in death, preservation, and perhaps spiritual transformation. Yet, a more provocative assertion emerged from a second analysis, CT imaging, of the object's interior deposition layers. The Norton Disney specimen showed scanning evidence of layers of soot and melted sap, with microscopic fragments of calcium phosphate suspended within, the chemical signature that associates most commonly with burned human bone. Among the research circles, chatter arose about the fragments corresponding to cremation residues more than natural decomposition. Presumably, this means that the object once held human remains or was involved in a ritual where human remains were present and subsequently burned. Then came the most damning revelation, a manuscript that named the object and warned against its power. The final leak. The final layer of the Roman dodecahedron mystery didn't emerge from a field or a lab. It came from a forgotten monastery in southern France, buried in the faded parchment of a crumbling manuscript. For centuries, the document known as the Codex Mistra had been dismissed by scholars as little more than a fragmented theological treatise, written in obscure Latin and patched with regional dialects. But in late 2024, a group of linguists re-examining the text using ultraviolet imaging uncovered something startling. A hidden phrase, faint but unmistakable. Orbis divinorum, the divine sphere. The passage was cryptic, its meaning tangled in poetic phrasing and archaic symbolism. It spoke of bronzen forms with 12 pierced faces, crowned and silent, used by the whispering ones of the forest to hear the voices of the stone sleepers. Those close to the manuscript's retranslation claim that what had once seemed metaphorical now reads as a direct reference to the Roman Dodecahedron, the 12 pierced faces, the knobbed crowns, the association with secret forest rituals and voices of the dead. This was no coincidence. The divine sphere, it seems, was its original name, and it may have been feared as much as it was revered. According to the text, the term Whispering Ones applied to a secluded sect that would practice their mysterious rites in woodland sanctuaries. Not presumably Roman, not almost Celtic, but a little of both. A syncretic order that could persist in the shadows of the empire. Some interpretations claimed the stone sleepers referred to the dead, or perhaps, in a looser sense, the ancestors interred beneath sacred monoliths and megaliths. It was not an instructive manuscript. It was a manuscript of warning. A line near the end of the passage chilled the investigators. "Let none awaken the Orbes save those prepared to bear its echo." A secret report emerged around early 2025, first rumored online and then leaked in bits and pieces to different academic circles. The report, which represented a collaboration among researchers from the UK, France, and Israel, contained metallurgical and chemical analysis of the Norton Disney dodecahedron, which deeply undermined the view that Roman artisans produced these artifacts. It was discovered that the bronze alloy would have matched Celtic foundry formula, not BCE 2nd-3rd century, but nearly a century and a half before the Roman conquest of the region, before any Roman presence, before imperial scrutiny, in other words. What was found in it is even more astonishing. Calcined human bone, fused with amber sap, and processed into animal fat. That is, a combination consistent with such rites as we know from history books as pre-Christian funerary and necromantic rites. Indications from people who were supposedly familiar with the leak suggest that the evidence pointed not to a Roman invention, but to types of Celtic spiritual technology. If this discovery shocked you, imagine what else lies beneath the soil of forgotten empires. Like, subscribe, and check out our next deep dive, because the past is more alive and more dangerous than we ever imagined.